You are listening to ProveText, a Glossa House podcast exploring Scripture with Dr. T. Michael W. Halcomb and Dr. Fredrick J. Long. Welcome and enjoy.
Hello and welcome to ProveText. I am Michael Halcomb and I am here with Fred Long. Fred, how's it?
Hey, doing all right, Michael. It's good to get back at Galatians and to read together and talk about it. One of my former students just told me yesterday how this is part of his routine to keep up his Greek. And so
Nice.
appreciates hearing the Greek and working with it. And that's great that we're producing something that is helpful.
Yeah, the podcast is doing really good in terms of growing in our listeners and a number of downloads. And we actually, while you were away the last couple weeks, we just surpassed 100 episodes. So that's pretty cool. This is episode, it's going to be episode 105 or 106 or something like that. So
Yeah. Well, my father passed away. It was a really graceful passing and needed to attend to a lot of family things. But it's just to be able to look at someone in the eyes and have them smile at you and tell me how much he loves me and vice versa was a very meaningful thing. I mean, everyone has that opportunity with death. It's just can be very sudden and, that kind of thing. So, thanks for filling in for me when I've been in some grief and travel and that kind of thing. So thanks, Michael.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess we're on a little bit of a tighter schedule today, so let's go ahead and jump into this. Let's look at Galatians 3:15 is where we're going to pick up.
Yep.
And we can turn there, and I'll start us with the Greek. And once we've done that, we'll get into discussing some grammar, syntax, content, theology, all that stuff. So here's what the Greek of Galatians 3:15 says. Adophiou kata anthropon lego. Omos anthropou ke kerumenen diatheken udis atheti e epidiatasete.
Great. Love it. Well, one thing that we notice with this verse here in the Greek is there's no connector. There's no conjunction. So this is something that's called a syndeton, and a syndeton can mark like a section break. And that's what I think we see here. Another use of a syndeton would be like a parallel statement, and we're not getting that parallel statement. So we're getting a break, like this is at least a paragraph break. The adelphi is a vocative, which also can point towards a break. And then you have the kata anthropon lego is I'm speaking according to people. So brothers, I'm speaking in a human way or according to humanity. This is a type of meta comment. So Paul here is pausing. He's addressing the Galatians as siblings, as you like to translate that. I think that's a great translation. I was talking to someone about this issue and proposed, I said, well, my colleague Michael proposes siblings, and the person was really struck with, that's good. Yeah, struck them as correct. But he's saying, I'm speaking in human terms, I think. So I'm speaking in human terms. So he's self-reflectively aware and communicating his communicative stance or topic to the Galatians. And he's saying, I'm speaking in human terms. And I think we're going to see an analogy or some analogies made, human scale, about human relationships, the way that humans relate to each other. And Paul is going to be explaining the nature of God's promise and covenant in regard to human institutions of legality and contracts and covenants and these kinds of things. At least that's my take.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to compare this with Galatians 3:1, where, here he starts adophiou, and there he begins like, anoetou, fools.
Yeah.
Here he calls the fools brothers or siblings, rather. And the change is kind of interesting from Galatians 3:1 to here, right?
Yeah, and that's because they're parallel then, because each is a syndeton. Each passage 3:1 begins with a vocative. Here we have a vocative. So it's interesting what has changed, what has affected this change in Paul's manner of reference to them, and what effect would this have on them as hearers? Is this going to make them more receptive at this point? I mean, I think the "you foolish Galatians" would be shocking.
Yeah.
Like that's going to capture their attention. And here he's calling them brothers, and that change is also going to capture their attention. But here there's a softening, I would say, right? You siblings.
Right. And I mean, this term other few, the siblings, it's used when you think of like literarily or rhetorically, right? A lot of scholars think this, like, to sort of divide up the epistle into discrete chunks, or rhetorical chunks anyway. So like you have it in 1:11, no rizogar, you mean other few. Right? He's referring to them as siblings there. Then in 3:1, fools. And then 3:15, again, other few. And then we have in 4:12, you meet other few. There it is again. And then in 4:28, you meet the other few. And then in 4:31, the other few. And then 5:11, ego the other few. 5:13, 6:1, 6:18. So I don't know that it's meant to structure or like break up the letter into discrete rhetorical units. I see a lot of overlap between the units, but
I think it's a paragraph level, right? We're dealing with maybe a paragraph level, like not a large level break.
yeah, I think, like, in terms of, I guess you'd say, pragmatics, right? I think what this is, it's certainly attention getting, but it's also conveying a level of emotion. And I think it's doing something too to suggest that, well, the idea of kinship terms. So the repetition of other few makes me think that the letter is a more of a warning and less of a correction. In other words, I don't know that the Christians in Galatia have already like left or committed apostasy, but that the temptation is there, so to speak, and he's warning them against doing so. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. There's reconstructing the circumstances. I mean, we've talked about that many times already, and we'll probably continue to. But certainly the reference of them, calling them brothers or siblings, is part of the overall point. Is that they still belong to God's family.
Yes,
and they should stay firm to the truth of the gospel that He's presented to them, and He's expounding on that, while I think also defending Himself as someone trustworthy and someone who was a friend that speaks the truth. And truth is very important to Paul. And part of the truth that he's going to be conveying is that they've been included within Abraham's family. As he can actually call them children of Abraham. And there's a repetition, as we would say in inductive biblical studies, observations, so a reoccurrence of filial language or familial kinship language. So language of family, father, son, brothers, siblings, So we're at this moment where he's going to be turning to particularly talk about Abraham's lineage being continued through the person of Jesus as the seed. And then we're eventually going to see that he's going to argue that they're children and heirs and no longer slaves.
Right.
But they're grown up. But he will turn to say, look, if you want to remain in slavery, that's not a good thing. Enslaved to the law, you've been set free from that. So right now, though, he's going to deal with the issue of a covenant and wills, last wills and testaments. So the rest of verse 15, so he starts with 15, siblings, I'm speaking in human terms. Likewise, a covenant ratified of a person, no one annuls or adds additional provisions.
Yeah.
Moreover, then verse 16, well, we're going to do that after break. But so he says, no one annuls or adds to it, adds a codicil. So this is a technical term, the epidiatasome. It's a middle formed verb. Tasso is to order. Then you have two prepositions on the front, epi and dia. And this is really a legal technical term. So if you look up the dictionary, the lexicon, it'll tell us that this verb is a technical term, and they suggest the meaning of like adding something to a will. So it's just not appropriate to do. Once this has been ratified, you can't just start adding something to a ratified covenant.
Right.
It's Paul's point. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too that prepositional phrase at the start, right after adelpheu kata anthropon. Man, when I read that, just I want to say kata anthropon, but when he's saying speaking like according to a human perspective,
Mm-hmm.
we have to ask, well, why is he even saying that? Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
speaking as a human. If we go back to the very beginning of the letter, I remember where he's saying, if I tell you, or even an angel tells you something other than what I first preached, right? So I wonder again, is he contrasting himself with, in 1:8, an angelos ex uranu, and a messenger out of the heavenly, or a messenger out of heaven? Is that why he's using the katanthropon, or is he also maybe contrasting himself with those mentioned in and earlier in the letter too, the troublemakers, right?
Yeah, I think my sense is that he's using kata anthropon according to a person or a person's perspective, or in human terms. I think he's, in what follows in the next several paragraphs, he's going to be speaking about things by analogy to human customs of relationships. He starts with covenant. He's eventually going to work his way to being an heir. And then he's going to talk about being a child under a tutor. So I think he's going to be talking about a series of human scale relationships as a way to then compare and contrast and talk about the nature of the gospel and the law, is my sense of that's why he's using this. So it's kind of like a heading. It's almost like a heading of, in what, I want you to track with what I'm going to be doing. I'm speaking in human terms here. And it's for the sake of, I think, their comprehension. So that's my take on it. I think are you taking it more like I'm speaking about human stuff here that we deal with? Is that kind of how you might take it? Or?
So yeah, I guess I have like the two views I was saying is one is he's either contrasting himself with an angelic figure coming to speak, or the other, the men from James who are claiming to be mouthpieces of God as well.
Yeah, Paul's
maybe
more
both
down
of
to
them.
earth.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of interesting yet to think about what he's, and, he does this in Corinthians several times where he says like, I say this, it's not a teaching of the Lord, but so he's prone to saying things like this all over the place. So yeah, it's interesting to ponder what is the kata anthropon probably contrasting with the angel of men from James, the fact that he's speaking clearly, whereas the religious officials are speaking in a different way, or I don't know.
Now the omos, which begins, which is after the lego, I'm speaking in human terms. There's some debate about how to interpret or translate that. So one way is to kind of set up a concessive idea, like then the NASB will say, even though it is only a man's covenant, yet when it has been ratified, no one sets it aside or adds conditions to it. Mm-hmm. Man, that is really interpretive. They're adding extra words there. Yeah, there's no, for example, even though it is supplying a finite verb is, but when you look at the Greek text, there's no finite verb there. In fact, all you're getting is a participle, literally covenant ratified of a person. And so that's accusative case. So covenant ratified, you have a perfect participle, middle passive, having been ratified. So covenant having been ratified of a person. So that's an accusative phrase, and with a genitive modifier that's fronted. A person's ratified covenant or will, because covenant can also mean will. And I think that's the human analogy here. No one annuls, or do they add something to it? So I think the grammar would say this is a accusative direct object of annul, or there's an alternative with the connector a, or add additional provisions. Like you just don't do that. So
it's set, right, is the point. Like once a covenant is set, it's set. You can't go back and modify.
So it's weird. Yeah. So there is a translation tradition, though, that takes the almost at the beginning, the almost as although, setting up a concessive subordinate clause. That to me doesn't make sense. Fortunately, BDAG also talks about and I think points towards an alternative and better understanding, and that's to understand it as meaning equally or likewise. So likewise, kind of just open, like an opening comparative adverb.
Yeah. Also, just real quick before we go to the break, touching on what I was saying, if we look ahead just slightly to 3:19, where he's talking about, why the law, and then he says, having been given essentially or put in place through messengers, through a mediator or in the hand of a mediator, that sets up a contrast between Paul and angels, or Paul and angelic figures with Moses. So I think he may be setting himself up in 3:15 as a contrast with Moses, or as a contrast with angelic figures having delivered a message to him. So, whereas some angelic figures in Jewish tradition were helping, I guess, deliver the law of God to Moses.
Deuteronomy talks about
that is one tradition, right?
Yep.
Paul is saying that didn't happen to me here. So that's where I was sort of trying to go earlier. I think that may be what Paul is setting himself up, why he says kata anthropon here.
So Paul is kind of placing his speech at a human scale and not trying to lay claim to special angelic, Mosaic revelation.
Yes, exactly.
Status.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm there, but it's certainly worth considering, because there is something going on there. There is something going on. What would Paul benefit to do that by? But maybe he would, just to run with your way of taking it, maybe he would be being, reflecting and demonstrating a more of a humility and a more and more. And here's where I would say he's doing. He is willing to speak in ways that at a human scale of understanding. So we see Paul arguing things out with people rather than heavy-handed laying claim to some kind of oracular authority.
Yeah, but if you think back,
there's something there that Paul is sensitive to in his letters, and that moves us a little bit closer to your interpretation.
Well, I think earlier in chapter 2:11, right, he's just saying, look, I went up and talked to Peter. Like, there wasn't any angels involved. There wasn't special Mosaic revelation or special revelation. Oh, I was talking to Peter.
Yeah, right? But he does say he went up by way of revelation, right? So
that is true. Yeah.
And then earlier he's talking about being set apart in his mother's womb, like Jeremiah and Isaiah. Like, he's laying a prophetic basis for his ministry. So
I don't know. I still think the contrast is between him and Moses, though. Like, or angelic figures. I don't know.
Yeah. You've got me thinking about this, and I do think we would agree that he is willing to say we need to work this through argumentatively and person to person.
Certainly, yeah. I'm not. Yeah, I don't want to lose the rhetorical Paul here. No. Yeah.
So I think we're agreed with that, and I think we also would agree that he does not want to just lay claim to some kind of special divine angelic heavy-handed authority.
Yes. Yeah. It's almost like Luke, right? When Luke starts, he's like, look, I did my homework, yet it's still a rhetorically crafted masterpiece. Luke doesn't just default to, like, God gave me this. No, Luke's doing his work, right?
Yeah. And I think there's problems when people appeal to special divine authority. And some were doing this because it shows up in different letters, warning against people who are kind of deluded and who are laying claim to special kind of authority, which can't be verified or denied.
Yeah.
So then people are subjected to these leaders who are laying claim to visions and special kinds of things. It seems like Paul is trying not to do that kind of thing. And yet he's also willing to affirm, God lies behind my calling.
Yeah, I think there's
putting up my words and how I'm arguing.
Yeah, there's a lot we could say about that too, and just seeing the abuse. And if you're in sort of more of the charismatic traditions, I'm not. I guess I am picking on you a little bit, but I've lived and moved and had my being in those circles for
me too a little bit.
A large swath of my my Christian journey, and still do. In fact, I'm still working with YWAM and King's Chapel out here in Hawaii. So I'm very ecumenical in that regard, but I also am very concerned about that abuse that often takes place of, God spoke to me this, or God told me to tell you this, or this sort of claim, and it's done so nonchalantly, like to special revelation. And that becomes very, very dangerous. And so to see Paul pulling back here and saying, look, I'm just speaking as a dude, like, that's,
that's kind of an interesting way. I'm speaking like a dude, which gets to both sides of it. I'm a human, and I'm speaking in a way that a human can understand.
Yeah.
I'm speaking exactly like a dude.
Looking for creative ways to launch your biblical language studies to the next level? We here at Glossa House create resources with you in mind. We've created a stock of innovative and cutting-edge audio, video, digital, and print resources to help you reach your language goals. Visit glossahouse.com to find what you've been looking for. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.
Here we go, Galatians 3:16 in Greek. To the Avraham erethesan evangelie que to spermate avtu ulegi que tu spermasin os epipolon a los ephenos que to spermatisu os estin Christos.
All right. So we have a de, which means moreover, like adding a new step. Moreover, to Abraham, the promises were spoken, and to his seed. It does not say, and to the seeds, as if referring to many, but as referring to one, and to your seed, which is Christ.
Oh, I like that translation. That's good.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So the moreover is significant. Yeah, moreover is significant there. And so, this verse has troubled interpreters, and some people will pick a beef with Paul when they consider Paul is making an argument of the singularity or pluralness of the original Hebrew word, which I think is it zera, seed?
Which word are you looking at?
Seed. It's the original that it's a collective noun. Yeah, that it's a collective noun. And so, of course, it would mean plural or imply plural. But Paul is making it singular, referencing the Septuagint, the Greek translation, which uses the singular sperma. And so making the point that the promise of Abraham basically is coming through a singular person, namely the Messiah. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Michael, but yeah.
If he's referring to seeds singular or plural,
whether that's a legitimate hermeneutical move, because the original Hebrew is a collective noun that inherently refers to a plurality, and then Paul yet is banking on a singular notion, which comes via way of the Septuagint. And so
which verse are we looking at in the Septuagint?
Looking that up. It's
this Genesis 12:7 or 13.
Yes. 15? I mean, I guess we could argue that the Septuagint, the Greek translation, had a further insight that this was going to come down to a singular kind of seed. Although you could also say that the word seed could be understood as a collective noun as well.
Well, the whole point in Genesis is, the whole point once Abraham comes onto the scene, even before that, but really it comes into focus when Abraham comes onto the scene, is everything has to come through this one line, this one seed. Otherwise,
really? So in Genesis, how is that so? Like through the one person of Abraham, you mean?
Yeah, just think back to Abram and Sarah, and then she can't have a child, right? So she has a concubine, Hagar, and Abraham and Hagar have Ishmael, and it doesn't count. Even though it's Abraham's seed, she wasn't of an Israelite lineage, so it doesn't count. It has to come Israelite, give birth to an Israelite, right? Or a Hebrew at this point. And so you have Isaac, and that counts. And then the same thing, it has to keep following through a specific lineage, right? It can't veer from that, or it doesn't count.
Yeah.
So that's in other words, it can't be like, so antecedes, for example, would be like Abram and Sarai plus Abram and Hagar. That would be antecedes. Like you would have two lines, and you get those two lines running all the way through Genesis with Isaac and Ishmael. So you get the Israelites who come out of Isaac and the Ishmaelites who come out of Ishmael. And even way later in Genesis, like these two figures and their descendants are at odds with one another. So when Joseph, he has his 11 brothers, they throw him into a pit, and what happens when Reuben pulls him out? He sells him. Now remember, Joseph is an Israelite. He's a descendant of Isaac. So, but when Reuben pulls him out, what's he do? He sells him to an Ishmaelite, to some Ishmaelites who are traveling down to Egypt. He sells him, traffics him. And so it can't work that way. You can't have the line of Isaac and the line of Ishmael. They don't both count. Only the line of Isaac counts. So it has to come through that seed, that line. And I get that we have sperma as seed here, but I almost wonder if lines might be better, right? So something like this. He did not say and to lines as of many lines, family lines, but as of one, and to thy line, which is the line or lineage of Christ. So instead of seeds, like lineage or line.
Yeah, but Paul does quote from the Septuagint, and he says, and the promise is to you and to your seed, which is Christ.
Yeah,
so
I'm fine with that. I have no issue with that.
So basically, we would say that Paul could still understand that corporate sense, but through that limited line of Abraham, through Isaac, which culminates in Christ.
Yes.
Yeah. And this, I think, is a bit of a worldview issue that we might struggle with, but actually probably genetically is sound. That in the loins of Abraham is the genetic matrix that's eventually going to work its way to the person of Jesus. Like Abraham's genetics is going to end up in Jesus. Now, maybe not all of his genetics, obviously, but there's a connection point of a lineage, and it's going to pop out in the person of the Christ. Yeah.
Yeah, I have zero issues with that. I think that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. So, okay, well, I guess it's not such a big issue, and those who get so upset about this, they get their undies in a bind that they shouldn't be doing so. It's just a simple matter of kind of extending and understanding kind of ancient understandings of descendancy. And that's why in genealogies, people, I remember a couple of fellows, they happened to be Jewish guys trained in Jewish school, and they went to college, university with me. They came to me and they said, hey, how come, the New Testament genealogies, they skip names, so-and-so begat so-and-so, when actually they weren't directly, in the line, they're skipping, names are skipped and missing in the genealogy lists of Matthew and then in Luke. And I'm like, boy, I don't know. Sorry, I can't help you with that. There must be some good answer though. I can tell you that. But at the time I didn't know the answer. Well, it just has to do with understanding that in genealogy lists that you can skip many generations and say, Abijah begat, whoever, Uz or whoever that is. You can say someone begat someone else, even though there's a gap of generations between them.
Sure.
Because of an understanding that there's a passage of genes and lineage through that comes out eventually with that person. Yeah. And that's what's going on here.
Yeah, and I mean, there's all kinds of, I guess, ramifications going on there, like even down to maybe the author's trying to save space on the page or save ink or like that kind of stuff. But also, like, it was just known. Like, you don't need to spell it all out.
Yeah, you don't need to spell it out.
It was known.
And of course, Matthew's is more, right? Did you have Dr. David Bauer's class on Matthew?
I did.
Did you hear? Yeah, you heard about his interpretation, right? So you have 3 groupings of 14.
Right.
14 is the name that David's name adds up to in Hebrew. and David's name is repeated the most of any name in that genealogy list 5 times. And Matthew stresses Jesus as son of David. To me, it's case closed.
Yeah.
But
the theological reasoning or agenda.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
theological reasoning. Yeah.
Yep.
So here then in 3:16, so Abraham received promises, plural, but not just Abraham, but also the seed. And that seed is identified as Christ. So this is setting up Paul's argument that Christ is the fulfillment of the Abrahamic promises, and therefore we shouldn't see the law, which comes after Abraham promise, as somehow changing the game.
Yep, exactly.
No, the main game is on. The main promise is on, and that's through Abraham's seed, which is fulfilled and seen in Christ.
Yeah. This is to me, this is a key, like the key to Paul's whole, and in these next 4 or 5 verses, everything Paul says in this whole letter hinges on this. Yeah. You can't, the covenant was already ratified with Abraham, and just because Moses came along, we can't add to or take away from it. We can't modify or change it. Yeah. And that's precisely what happened. We in our Israelite or Hebrew history, that's exactly what we've done. We've put the Mosaic law and out in front of the Abrahamic covenant and interpreted the Abrahamic covenant through the lens of the Mosaic law. But really what we should be doing is interpreting the Mosaic law through the lens of the Abrahamic covenant. Yeah.
It's I find it interesting that in Jewish teaching, Abraham was eventually said that he was born circumcised, and things like this to do, to resolve a problem that, he had to wait a while to get circumcised and, that kind of thing. But anyway, so, I think that wraps it up for today. I did have a parting thought.
Parting shot. Good. What is it?
Parting thought or shot. Well, I had one pulled up and then my browser just crashed. So I wanted to get something from Augustine, or is it Augustine? And I can't find the exact one, but let's try this one. Don't hold yourselves cheap, seeing that the creator of all things and of you estimates your value so high, so dear, that he pours out for you every day the most precious blood of his only begotten son. So perpetual sacrifice once and for all. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you guys for listening and supporting the podcast. We're trying to slowly grow this thing and, always adding. So keep listening, keep sharing, keep supporting. And Fred, thanks for your time today, and glad to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for your hard work on this. And we look forward to having you all listen to us next time. Take care.